Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche organization with your daily update for today, May 12th, 2021. There are some very interesting developments on the strategic situation which reflect the efforts of our organization and the Schiller Institute to force a public discussion of the danger of nuclear war. Of course, there's an effort by the people who are pushing this. That is the neoconservatives, the war hawks from the United States government, the State Department, the military, the intelligence agencies, as well as such so-called allies as the United Kingdom and the NATO forces. There's an effort to make it seem as though Russia and China are hell-bent on taking over the world and are pushing us into a position where we have to threaten to use war to stop them. Now, this becomes increasingly dangerous, and Helga LaRouche has taken the lead in insisting that this must be discussed. And we're seeing people come forward now, for example, at the Schiller Institute conference on May 8th, and you can look at that on schillerinstitute.com and see various people from around the world addressing these issues of war and peace in a serious, mature way. Dialogue, not confrontation. Well, a very important contribution to this discussion was provided by Daniel Ellsberg, the figure who is best known for his role in releasing the Pentagon Papers, which showed the lies and the fraud involved in the U.S. war in Vietnam in the late 1960s and early 70s, showing that the U.S. Defense Department was repeatedly lying about the strategic situation, about the nature of the war, the progress of the war, and so on. Now, those papers were released 50 years ago, so Ellsberg spoke on Democracy Now! In a commemoration of that event, and he spoke about the danger of nuclear war. And he revealed that in 1958, then Secretary of State John Foster Dulles, whose brother Allen Dulles was running the CIA, that John Foster Dulles proposed that the Joint Chiefs of Staff recommend a nuclear strike on China over the crisis with Taiwan. Now, this is from a still classified portion of a RAND Corporation study, and it points out that during the 1958 crisis of the Taiwan Strait, with confrontation over the islands of Quemoy and Matsu, that Dulles proposed that the Joint Chiefs of Staff put together a plan for a nuclear strike on China. And Dulles is quoted by Ellsberg as saying, "Nothing seems worth a world war until you look at the effect of not standing up to the challenge. In other words, risk the obliteration of humanity in order to seem tough in the face of what at the time was thought to be Chinese communist aggression." Ellsberg pointed out that this portion of the RAND Corporation study is still classified. So he said in the interview, "Let them try to jail me for disclosing this still top secret fact today." He went on to say that he's sure that this kind of discussion about nuclear war is still underway in the Pentagon. And so he said, we have to discuss this today in public, whether we should go to nuclear war over Taiwan or Ukraine over Syria. And he reminded people of the statement by Admiral Charles Richard, who's the current commander of the U.S. Strategic Command, who said that the U.S. must be prepared to go to war with Russia and China, if possible, or if necessary, nuclear war. Ellsberg said of that, "This is asinine, criminally insane. It threatens the survival of mankind on the planet." And he said, we have to transcend that system. Well, that's precisely right. This is why Helga LaRouche has been emphasizing the need to move to a new paradigm, not based on geopolitics, on confrontation, of flexing the muscles at the slightest seeming insult or threat, but actually negotiating, talking about these things. Ellsberg said that it's necessary for people in government today to show the moral courage of Edward Snowden and Chelsea Manning by saying that which is secret, by getting it out in the public so it can be discussed, as opposed to having us go into these wars based on lies and fakery. He said, he called on future whistleblowers, let us know what these inside plans are. Without that, he said, I think civilization will not survive the era of nuclear weapons. Now, how important is this? We've just seen two cases where there's an immediate flashpoint of danger. One, Ukraine, where the Ukrainian government was challenging Russia, saying that Ukraine claims that Crimea is a part of Ukraine and that the Russians must leave the Donbas region. Well, there's no evidence that the Russians have military forces there in the first place. But the Russians had military maneuvers inside Russia on the Ukraine border, while NATO is having forces, including U.S. forces, all over Eastern Europe, on the borders with Russia, in the Europe Defender 21 exercises. And yet, the argument is that Russia is aggressive, is encroaching, is bullying, has malign intent, but NATO is purely defensive. Although the coup in Ukraine in 2014 was not defensive, it was an offensive regime change run by US and British and to some extent NATO networks, utilizing right-wing militia that included Nazis among them, who are still marching on the streets of Kiev, demanding an ethnically pure Ukraine. So the US is siding with forces that are committed to war, while the Russians are showing their muscles to basically say, don't cross a red line. Ukraine coming into NATO is a red line. Overthrowing the government of Belarus and assassinating the president is a red line, which must not be crossed. Now, this makes clear that the proposal for a Biden-Putin summit is crucial, but that it take place not with the U.S. flexing muscles and making threats, but coming to the table and actually discussing what would be the basis for peace. What are the common interests that Russia and the United States have? This is why the Schiller Institute is emphasizing collaboration to build a world-class healthcare system in every country. Why we're pushing for a rejection once and for all of austerity and International Monetary Fund gouging and looting of countries, and instead a commitment to real economic development based on infrastructure similar or along the lines of what the Chinese are doing with the Belt and Road Initiative. Why is that viewed by some in the Biden administration, and of course by people like Pompeo, Esper, and others from the Trump administration? Why is that viewed as a threat, building infrastructure in Africa and South Asia? How does that threaten American interests, to have countries lifted out of poverty, to give their population hope for the future? Now, while we're having this discussion, there's an ongoing rumble in the back room saying that Russia was probably responsible for the ransomware shutdown of the Colonial Pipeline. And now, Biden, in discussing this, had to say, so far there's no evidence Russia is involved. Well, why would you even bring up Russia if there's no evidence? Well, because it's routine to accuse Russia when there's no evidence, as we saw with the 2016 election, with the solar winds case, with the alleged poisoning of Navalny and the Skripals. And look, one question that should be asked these so-called chemical weapons experts, if Novichok is so deadly, how come all these people who were supposedly hit with Novichok poisoning by the Russians survived? And why won't the German health hospital authorities release their findings that supposedly prove that Navalny was poisoned with Novichok? Why won't they release it to Russian prosecutors? Well, this is the fraud. This is the lies, the scandals that are used to impose sanctions and warlike measures to provoke a confrontation between the United States and Russia and the United States and China. This is what must be overcome. And I think we owe Daniel Ellsberg a debt of gratitude, not simply for what he did the other day in raising this and demanding that there be a discussion, but the courage that he showed in releasing the Pentagon Papers, which could have put him in prison for life, which, by the way, is essentially what they're threatening to do to Julian Assange with the demand that he be extradited to the United States. So we're dealing with an absolutely corrupt cabal in the intelligence services of the transatlantic countries, committed to war with Russia and China. We have to talk about it, we have to smoke them out, and we have to bring forward a discussion process which puts an end to this kind of threatening posture, allegedly on behalf of the interests of the United States. We've proven now, with the endless wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, that these wars do not bring peace and do not make us more secure. So let's learn the lessons that, as Ellsberg pointed out, are 50 years of lessons to break with this belligerence and actually have real negotiations. Thanks for joining me, and I'll be back again tomorrow.